The first thing you notice isn't the sight of the castle. It's the smell. It hits you before the gates have even shut behind you. A sour, heavy staleness that clings to the back of your throat and settles in your clothes. There is woodsmoke in it, yes, and the faint tang of iron from the portcullis chains. But beneath those comes something older, something human, and it doesn't fade. You've stepped through the outer gatehouse into a world people imagine as crisp with fresh air and bracing wind's stone walls standing proud against the elements. In truth, the castle is more of a living lung than a clean fortress. Everything that passes through it, animal, human, fire, food, leaves something behind. The walls don't breathe, they trap. The outer bailey stretches ahead, a muddy expanse ringed with stables, sheds and workshops. The air here is a jumble, the sharp, nose-pinching reek of horse dung from the stables, the hot, greasy aroma of a tanner's pit somewhere close by, the sourness of old hay. Chickens scatter as a cart lurches past its wheels, furrowing the mud. Two pigs root happily in what looks like and probably is kitchen waste, tipped straight from a bucket. If you thought the smell might be just a passing whiff from the animals, you are quickly disabused of that hope. Past the bailey, a second gatehouse waits heavier, narrower. Beyond it lies the inner ward. Here the air is thicker still. There's less wind between these walls, so everything lingers longer, the smoky haze from the great hall's hearth, the acrid tang from the blacksmith's forge, the faint sweetness of spilled ale gone sticky in the heat. You see laundry strung between two small towers, but even the drying cloth seems infused with the place's breath, as if the stone itself is exhaling centuries of use. Then you step inside the keep. It's darker than you expect, and colder, but the coal doesn't smell clean. Instead, it smells lived in, as if the damp air has been pressed through generations of lungs and never quite let go. Your eyes adjust slowly, picking out the rough plastered walls and thick beams overhead. The floor is a patchwork stone flags near the door, but rushes scattered across most of the chamber. They're meant to soften footsteps and soak up spills, but after weeks of use, they hold more than dust. You catch a whiff of something unmistakable urine, not necessarily human though that too, but certainly from the hounds that wander freely through the hall, shaking themselves dry after running the yard, leaving little puddles in their wake. Your guide, a short, wiry man in a faded tunic, doesn't seem to notice the odor at all. He strides towards the center of the hall, gesturing at the long trestle tables, the high-backed chair on the dais, the banners hanging limp above. This, he says proudly, is where the Lord takes his meals, hears petitions, holds court. What he doesn't say is that it's also where the household eats, drinks, sings, argues, bleeds, and occasionally dies. A hall like this is never truly empty. It's a place of constant use and constant waste. Every spilled drink, every scrap of food kicked under the table, every dropped bone adds to the slow layering of smells in the rushes. Near the dais, a pair of dogs gnaw at something unidentifiable. A boy chases them off with a stick, scooping the scraps into a wooden bowl, not for the rubbish heap for the pig trough outside. Nothing is wasted, but nothing is quite cleaned either. Over in one corner, you spot the reason for the hall's worst undertone, a narrow doorway leading to the garderobe. You've heard of medieval toilets before. Perhaps you've even laughed at the word, but nothing prepares you for the reality. The passage is short, barely shoulder wide, ending in a rough wooden seat, over a vertical shaft. The smell here is different from the general musk of the hall, sharper, rotting, and though the shaft drops all the way to the base of the wall, it doesn't take the smell with it. The stone holds it. Below, in the shadow of the curtain wall, a cesspit waits, sometimes cleaned, often not. Rainwater might flush it through in storms, but in still weather it sits and festers. Back in the hall, you catch your breath, but it's hard to tell if the air is better or if you're simply becoming used to it. That you think might be the real secret people stop noticing. To those who live here, this blend of smoke, animals, damp, and human waste is simply the smell of life. If they noticed at all, they'd likely call it homely, comforting even. The guide leads you up a narrow spiral stair. Here, the air changes again, not fresher, just different. The upper chambers smell of the bedchambers. They are old wool blankets, straw mattresses, chamber pots that have not yet been emptied. In one corner, a carved chest sits half open, the musty scent of stored linen rising from within. From a small window slit, you look down into the castle yard. The stables smoke faintly from their dung-heated floors. The tanner's pit still steams. Somewhere below, a cook tips a bucket of fish heads to the waiting cats. You breathe it all in and realize the truth. This place smells like death, not because it is abandoned or ruined, but because it is entirely alive. Everything here, from the Lord's feast to the lowest kennel, produces waste. The walls trap it, the air swirls it, the seasons change it, but never wash it away completely. It is the smell of history in the making and of all the flesh and bone that history is made from. By the time you leave the keep for the open air, the wind in the outer bailey feels like a blessing. You realize you've been holding your breath without meaning to. And yet, even outside the gates, the scent of the castle follows you, clinging to your hair, your skin, your clothes. You've taken a little of it with you. Everyone does. By now, you've noticed that every step in the Great Hall feels soft. Not carpet soft, nothing so luxurious, but muted, uneven, a little springy in places, and oddly crisp in others. At first glance, the floor is strewn with dried plants, long stems of rushes, bits of straw, a scattering of herbs. They give the hall a rustic, almost inviting air, like an endless meadow underfoot. But the longer you stand here, the more you understand this is no meadow. Rushes are meant to serve as a kind of medieval floor covering, insulating bare stone from the cold and providing a touch of comfort underfoot. They are cut from riverbanks or marshy ground, bundled and brought into the hall in long green lengths. When fresh, they smell faintly sweet, almost grassy. The herbs, marjoram, lavender, meadowsweet, are meant to add a fragrance to keep insects at bay, even to mask less pleasant odours. It's a small nod to comfort in a world without scented candles or lemon polish. But there's a problem. Fresh rushes don't stay fresh. Day by day, the floor covering collects the life of the hall. Not just the dirt from boots and paws, but every spill of ale, every drop of grease from a trencher, every fallen scrap of meat gnawed and forgotten. Dogs and cats track in mud or worse. People relieve themselves in corners when the garderobe is too far or too cold to bother with. Children spit, cough, and sometimes vomit. And because the rushes are not replaced weekly or even monthly, all of it stays. You stoop down and lift a corner of the rushes where they meet the wall. The top layer is dry enough though, dotted with crumbs and the odd chicken feather. but just beneath the stalks are darker, matted together, almost black in places. A sour, composting smell rises immediately, sharp enough to sting your nose. This is the hidden truth of the rushes. They rot from the bottom up. In theory, they are supposed to be cleared out and replaced at least once or twice a year, usually in spring and autumn, timed with major feast days or when an important guest is expected. But in practice, the labor is heavy, the smell appalling, and the job unpopular. So the layers stay down longer, sometimes much longer. One chronicler from the 15th century, a man accustomed to fine houses, described visiting a lesser lord's hall where the rushes had not been changed in years. The bottom layers, he wrote, had become foul with spittle, urine, the droppings of dogs and cats, and the refuse of beer and victuals. He claimed the floor covering was so thick you could lose a small coin in it and not find it again for a season. It is not a floor so much as a shallow midden. Now imagine the heat of a crowded feast. The great fire roars at one end of the hall, smoke curling into the rafters. Dozens of bodies press shoulder to shoulder along the trestles, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat, wine, and sweat. Grease drips onto the rushes, mixing with spilled drink. Dogs prowl underfoot, licking what they can, leaving the rest. Over the course of a single evening, the floor absorbs enough to feed a colony of flies. In summer, it's almost alive with them. And yet for all this, the rushes serve a purpose. They are warmer than bare stone, and they cushion the fall of a knife or a jug. They muffle the noise of boots and hooves. They even serve as a kind of crude waste management, soaking up the mess so it's not smeared underfoot. Without them, the hall would be slick and treacherous. You suspect the choice has always been between a floor you can smell and a floor you can't stand on. Still, in the stillness of the afternoon when the feasting is done and the fire burns low, the smell rises from the floor like breath from the earth. It mingles with the smoke, the damp wool, the wet dog, a smell both specific and inescapable. Even the herbs once bright and pleasant turn musty, crushed into the rotting mat below. You tread on rosemary and smell mold. In winter, it is worse. The rushes hold damp like a sponge, never quite drying out between the spills and the tracked-in snow. Mold takes root deep in the layers. The warmth of the hearth only coaxes the smell upward, spreading it through the hall. And in summer, the heat quickens decay. The bottom layers sweat in the warmth, their reek heavy and sour. No wonder guests traveling from fresh air into the castle remark on the change. It is the smell of a floor that has been lived upon more than it has been walked upon. If you live here long enough, you stop noticing or tell yourself you have. But the smell of the rushes is the foundation of the castle's scent, woven into every breath taken within these walls. It lingers in clothing, in bedding, even in the wooden beams overhead. The floor is not just something you walk on. It's something you live in, and it remembers. By the time you step back out into the yard, the fresher air feels thin, lacking the density you've grown used to in the hall. And for a moment, you wonder, will the smell follow you? Of course it will. You notice it as soon as you tilt your head back. The light slants through the high windows of the great hall, catching moats in the air. Not dust alone, but smoke thin as spider silk and just as persistent. It hangs there, never quite clearing, as though the air itself has been stained. This is not the clean smoke of a fleeting campfire. This is smoke that has lived here for centuries. The hearth is the hall's heart, a vast open fire set on a low stone platform. In winter, it burns almost day and night. In summer, it's kept alive to feed the cooking pots. There is no chimney, only a vent in the roof to draw the smoke upward. In theory, the warm air rises and escapes. In reality, the smoke does not go meekly. It curls, hesitates, drifts sideways. It threads itself into the beams, the banners, the rushes, and most of all, the roof. The rafters are black with it. Centuries of burning have lacquered the timber until it gleams darkly, even in the dim light. The smell is thickest up there. Oily, resinous, a perfume of pine tar oak and whatever else has been burned. It's not just wood that's fed this hearth. In times of scarcity, almost anything will do: peat-dried dung, even bundles of reeds or seaweed. Each leaves its own mark in the air. Peat adds a mineral tang, almost metallic. Dung smoulders with a sour, acrid bite that prickles the eyes. Seaweed, when burned, leaves a briny ghost of low tide drifting through the hall. In the stillness between meals, the smoke settles low enough to taste. It clings to your tongue, bitter and dry. You feel it in the back of your throat in the faint rasp that follows a day inside these walls. Servants speak of a castle cough, not an illness exactly, but a constant reminder that they live in air that has been burned before. The smell of the fire itself changes with the day's business. When meat is roasting on the spit, the smoke is rich and savory, full of dripping fat that hisses when it strikes the embers. That scent seeps into clothes, hair, and skin until you carry it to bed with you. When nothing is cooking, the smoke is plainer, sharper, a reminder that the fire's real purpose is heat, not pleasure. On damp days, it's worse. The wood sulks in the hearth, smouldering without flame, filling the hall with a sullen fug. You look up again to the beams. Cobwebs cling to the upper timbers, each strand darkened by soot. Banners and hangings sway slightly in the draught, their colours dulled by years of smoke. Even the carved bosses along the roofline are almost invisible under their blackened skin. The rafters are more than decoration. They are history's lungs, holding the breath of every fire that's burned here. And then there's the kitchen. If the hall is the heart, the kitchen is the furnace. In a castle large enough to house dozens, even hundreds of mouths, the kitchen fire burns hotter and longer than anywhere else. Here pots bubble from dawn until the last scraps are ladled out at night. The smell is denser, more layered, not only wood and peat, but steam from boiling broth, the pungency of onions and garlic, the sweetness of baking bread. Step too close to the hearth here, and your clothes will be marked for days. The kitchen smoke carries the memory of every meal ever cooked, all folded into the greater perfume of the castle. It is easy to forget that smoke is not just smell, it is matter. Minute particles settle everywhere on table trestles, in carved mouldings, across the rushes on the floor. They mix with the dust from the rafters and the damp rising from the walls. When a shaft of sunlight breaks through the high window, you see them swirl in not just dirt, but a record of everything burned here. You breathe them in, and now a little of the castle is inside you. In summer, the vent in the roof is thrown wide, but the smoke still lingers. The draft is never quite enough to carry it all away. In winter, the vent is often half closed to keep the heat in, and the smoke hangs heavier still. Some swear it is why the castle smells the way it does, not just foul, but old. Smoke preserves in its own way. It seasons the wood, waterproofs the thatch, and mummifies the air. But it also preserves the memory of burning. This hall has seen more than roast beef and bread. Fires have been lit here in haste, in defense, in destruction. Soot marks on the far wall hint at a blaze quenched just in time. The smoke from that day still whispers in the rafters, mingled with the daily haze of cooking and heat. It is a smell you do not forget, even if you live here all your life. Perhaps especially if you live here all your life. It seeps into your sense of what home is. As you leave the hall, stepping into the courtyard, the air is cooler, cleaner, but you can still smell the hearth on your clothes. It will be there when you eat, when you lie down to sleep, even when you walk beyond the gates. The smoke is the castle's shadow. You carry it whether you wish to or not. The castle yard is alive. Alive with sound, with movement, and with smells so fierce they seem to hum in the air. Stepping out from the keep is like plunging into a different world. No longer the smoky dimness of the hall, but a churn of open-air sunlight and odours that have nowhere to hide. And yet for all the openness, the air here is not fresh. The bailey, the space between the inner walls of the castle, is the heart of daily work. Every trade, every animal, every necessity of life converges here. On your left, the stables. Even from a distance, they make their presence known. The rich ammoniac sting of horse urine mingles with the warm, almost sweet smell of manure. The scent isn't just on the ground. It rises from the very walls, soaked in by years of steaming, dung-heated bedding. A stable boy leads a mare into the yard, her flanks slick with sweat, her tail swishing at flies. The smell of her mingles with the leather of her tack, the oil used to keep the saddle supple and the tang of iron from the bit in her mouth. Next to the stables, a pen holds pigs. They root in a pile of kitchen scraps, grunting and snorting, their bristle backs crusted with mud. The smell of pigs is deeper, muskier than that of horses, an earthy, oily odour that seems to wrap around you, clinging long after you've moved on. The trough bubbles faintly as they shove their snouts into it, stirring old cabbage leaves and fish heads into a broth you hope never to taste. Beyond them, the tanner's workshop works its grim magic. Hides are stretched on frames, their edges curling as they dry. The air here is thick with the reek of curing animal skins, soaked in urine dung or lime to loosen the hair before scraping. A man in a leather apron scrapes a hide with a long blade, each stroke releasing a fresh wave of sourness. It catches in your throat, making you swallow hard against the urge to gag. This is the smell of industry, of livelihood, but also of decay slowed just enough to be useful. Across the yard near the kitchen door, smoke rises from a midden heap where ashes are thrown. Here the kitchen waste meets the refuse of the hall. Vegetable peelings, fish bones, broken pottery, all tipped together in a slow mound of rot. The smell shifts as you pass, sometimes a harmless whiff of compost, sometimes the sharp, nauseating stench of something that has lain too long. The flies love it, so do the rats. In one corner of the bailey, laundry hangs on lines strung between poles. For a moment you hope for a breath of clean linen, but even here the wind carries the scents of the yard. Soap in the Middle Ages is not scented with lavender or rose. It's made with lye and animal fat, and it smells faintly acrid. The clothes themselves carry ghosts of the life lived in them. Smoke from the hall, sweat from the fields, damp from the river. Clean is relative here. The people of the yard move through this stew of smells without comment. The blacksmith hammers at his anvil, the air around him tasting of hot iron and coal dust. A cook tips a pot of grey water into the gutter, where it runs into a shallow channel cutting across the yard, the open drain that carries away whatever the castle discards. The liquid snakes its way toward the outer wall, its smell growing sharper as it mingles with other runoff. Children dart between adults, their laughter high and quick. A dog barks, snapping at a chicken that flaps indignantly toward the coop. The coop itself smells faintly of straw and droppings, a lighter note in the yard's symphony of scents. It is, you realize, not one smell, but dozens, all layered and constantly shifting. The wind doesn't clear them, it just rearranges them. From one moment to the next, you might get the salt tang of drying fish, then the sweet rot of fruit past its best, then the sharp bite of fresh dung. The yard is an honest place. It hides nothing. In winter, the cold dulls the smells but never erases them. The stables steam in the frost. The midden heap smoulders faintly where the compost heats within. In summer, the heat lifts every scent into the air, making the yard almost visible with its haze of flies and drifting moats. The people here don't wrinkle their noses. To them, the smell is the smell of work, the proof that life inside these walls is turning, producing, sustaining. Without it, something would be wrong. Still, as you walk toward the far gate, you feel it settle on you. The air of the bailey is clingy, like the smoke of the hall. It gets into your hair, your skin, the fabric of your clothes. By the time you step beyond the yard into the quieter spaces of the inner ward, you know you've carried a little of it with you. And you know too that even if you left the castle entirely, the smell of the yard would ride with you for hours, perhaps days. It is part of you now, as it is part of everyone who calls this place home. You've smelt the rushes, you've tasted the smoke, you've walked through the yard. But there is one place in the castle where all pretense falls away, where the air is not merely unpleasant but assaults you outright. The garderobe. The name sounds almost polite, as if it might be a room for keeping clothes or valuables, and in a way it is. The word comes from the idea of guarding robes by hanging them in a space where the smell might drive away moths. But in reality, the garderobe is the medieval answer to the toilet, and it is far less refined than the name suggests. The entrance is an unassuming wooden door, often tucked into a narrow passage in the wall. You pull it open, and at once the smell spills out thick and sour, a mixture of ammonia rot and something faintly metallic. It has the sharpness of a wound that's never cleaned. Inside the space is barely wide enough to stand in, with a stone or wooden seat set over a gaping hole. Beneath that hole is a vertical shaft plunging down through the thickness of the wall, and at the very bottom a cesspit, or the open air above the moat. If you're lucky, the garderobe you visit opens onto running water so that rain or the flow of the moat can carry away the waste. But away is a generous term. In most cases, it simply drifts to another part of the castle's surroundings, lingering in the shallows, or collecting in the reed beds. If you're less lucky, the shaft drops into a static cesspit that must be emptied by hand. The men who do this are nightmen paid little, known by all, avoided by most. The smell is not confined to the shaft. It creeps upward, settling into the stones, seeping into the wood. In summer, flies find their way in, swirling lazily in the dim light. In winter, the cold sharpens the scent, making it cleaner but no less aggressive. This is not a place for lingering. Yet the garderobe has its quirks. The narrow passages leading to it are sometimes built into the outer walls, meaning the seat itself is cantilevered over empty space. Sitting there, you can feel the wind through the gap, a faint relief in the warmer months, a biting misery in the cold. And then there's the risk. In times of siege, enemy soldiers have been known to climb up the waist shafts to infiltrate a castle. Imagine it, a man silent and desperate crawling upward through human filth, emerging into the very heart of his enemy's home. For that reason, some garderobes were fitted with iron bars across the chute. The name's other connection to clothing is not entirely fanciful. Robes and furs were sometimes stored in garderobes, precisely because the smell was thought to deter pests. You picture a row of fine cloaks hanging above that dark shaft, the reek rising to coil about them. The moths may stay away, but you suspect the human wearers suffered. Waste from the garderobe does not vanish from the castle's life. If it empties into the moat, the water is tainted. And if that moat feeds livestock or fish ponds, the taint follows. If it drops into a cesspit, the smell can drift across the yard, particularly in the still air of summer. And when the pit is emptied, the stench spreads as the waste is carted away, often to be used as fertilizer in nearby fields. It's an economy of necessity. Everything here is part of the same cycle and nothing truly leaves. Some castles, particularly later ones, have multiple garderobes, one for the Lord's chamber, others for the household staff, and communal ones for the garrison. Each has its own venting, its own little shaft, but they all contribute to the same olfactory tapestry, the faintly sour breath of human life woven into stone. And if you think this is the worst of it, remember that the garderobe was often not far from other rooms. In smaller castles, it might be tucked behind the Lord's solar or adjacent to the Great Hall. A door separates you from the sight of it, but not always from the smell. You imagine dining at a long table, the scent of roasted meat in the air, while a faint sour note lingers just at the edge of awareness, the ghost of the garderobe down the corridor. Even here, people grow used to it. Servants dash in and out without a thought. Children giggle at the sounds. Soldiers sit unbothered, the smell no worse than the yard or the stables. But for the uninitiated, for you, the first breath inside a garderobe is unforgettable. It is the smell of the castle with its mask removed. All the herbs in the rushes, all the smoke in the rafters, all the airs of courtly life cannot hide the truth of what people are and what they leave behind. By the time you step back out into the passage, the air feels cool, almost clean. You know it is, and it carries its own sense of stone and damp. But after the garderobe, anything is an improvement. And yet, as you walk away, the smell clings. It lives in the back of your nose, in the folds of your clothes, in the quiet memory of the pit beneath the seat. It will be with you for the rest of the day. From the garderobe, the waste flows outward, or so you hope. You follow its imagined path through the thickness of the wall down the chute and into open air. The sound of water reaches you before the sight of it, a slow, lazy slap against stone. Then the moat appears broad and dark, circling the castle like a sluggish serpent. From a distance, a moat looks almost romantic, a shimmering belt of protection glinting in the sunlight, a mirror for the sky. Up close, you see the truth. The water is greenish-brown, opaque, its surface dappled with scum. A few ducks paddle in the shallows, indifferent to the smell that wafts upward on the breeze. It is the smell of stillness. A healthy river runs fast, scrubbing itself clean. A moat, however, is designed to linger. Its water may be diverted from a stream or spring, but the flow is slow, sometimes imperceptible. This is by design. A moat must be deep and constant, not rushing away with the seasons. But still, water is hungry. It keeps whatever falls into it. And much does fall. From the garderobes, waste drops directly into the moat, where it sinks into the silt or drifts slowly with the current. From the yard, rain washes dirt and refuse into drainage channels that empty into the water. From the kitchens, dishwater pours out clouded with grease and scraps. If an animal dies nearby and is too cumbersome to drag far, it may find its final rest in the moat. The water hides what the eye would rather not see. The smell changes with the weather. On cool, windy days, the breeze can scatter it, making it a faint background note, a hint of rot, a whiff of dampness. But on warm, still afternoons, the moat breathes heavily. The scent is ripe, full-bodied, a mingling of stagnant algae, decomposing matter, and the faint ammonia of urine. If you lean over the edge, you can pick out other notes: the sourness of wet vegetation, the metallic tang of silt, the faint oily whiff of kitchen fats clinging to the surface. Mosquitoes love it. So do other insects. In summer, the air above the moat hums faintly, a shimmering layer of life feeding on what lies beneath. Swallows dart and skim the surface, taking their fill. Frogs croak from the margins, their chorus competing with the core of crows overhead. The moat is not just a defense, it is an ecosystem thriving on decay. And yet, for all its filth, the moat is not without use. In times of peace, some castles draw water from it for cleaning floors or flushing waste, a dangerous practice given what the water holds. In times of siege, desperate defenders may even drink from it, once the well runs dry, boiling it if they can. It is in the bluntest sense the castle's bloodstream. What goes in rarely leaves, and what leaves is never truly gone. You think of the men who must clear the moat. In the driest months, when the water level drops, laborers wade into the shallows to drag out debris. They use long poles with hooks to snag branches, broken barrels, and the occasional carcass. It is filthy work, the mud clutching at their boots, the smell rising with each disturbed step. When the task is done, the moat may look cleaner, but its scent lingers soaked into the banks and the very stones of the walls. In winter, when ice forms, the smell is muted, but the danger increases. The ice is never entirely solid. The moat hides pockets of water beneath. More than one unwary child or soldier has fallen through, swallowed by the dark. In spring, as the thaw comes, the trapped gases rise in a rush, the smell blooming into the air all at once, a reminder of everything that ice has kept for months. It's not only human waste that finds its way here. During a siege, the moat may be deliberately fouled. Dead animals or even human corpses are thrown in to spread disease among attackers who might attempt to cross. In such moments, the moat becomes more than a barrier. It is a weapon, a slow, invisible strike against anyone who dares draw near. Even in peacetime, the water is not to be trusted. Those who fall in may emerge shivering and soaked, but also sick. The ailments borne by such water are varied fevers, dysentery worse. No one with a choice drinks from the moat. Standing at the edge, You notice the way the smell seems to cling to the stone. Even when the wind shifts, bringing you air from beyond the castle walls, the damp masonry beneath your hands carries its own faint reek, the ghost of centuries of contact with this water. The moat is always here, always circling. It watches, it waits, and it holds onto everything you'd rather forget. As you step back toward the gatehouse, the smell lingers in your nose. You've moved away from the water, but a trace follows you. A reminder that in a castle, every smell is connected. The garderobe, the yard, the moat, they feed each other, just as they feed the life within these walls. And in the stillness of a summer night with the windows open, the moat will send its breath drifting inward, so that even the Lord's bedchamber is not beyond its reach. If the moat is the castle's stagnant breath, the kitchens are its roaring belly. You step through a thick wooden door into a rush of heat and noise. The air hits you like a wave, warm, wet, and heavy with scents that jostle for dominance. At first, it seems almost pleasant after the cold stink of the moat. The smell of roasting meat, fresh bread, and herbs simmering in broth fills the space. But linger a moment longer and the undertones begin to make themselves known. The kitchen is a chamber of layers, not just in flavor but in odor. Nearest the great hearth, the smell is rich with cooking fat, dripping from a turning spit into the fire, sending up savory plumes. Onions and garlic softening in a pot, loaves baking on heated stones, their crusts crackling. But beneath this lies the sharpness of sweat from the men and women who work here, their faces flushed, hair damp from the heat. They move constantly, stirring, chopping, carrying trays. The kitchen is as much a furnace for people as it is for food. And then there is the smoke. It rolls off the hearth in slow curls, drifting into the rafters where it mingles with the smell of singed meat and baked bread. You can taste it on your tongue, faintly bitter coating the back of your throat. Some castles have chimneys, others vent through roof holes, but either way, the smoke never entirely leaves. It seasons everything in the room, the walls, the benches, the very bread. Move toward the chopping block and a new scent meets you, the iron tang of raw meat. Carcasses hang from hooks, swaying slightly as they're cut down for the day's meals. The smell is fresh but insistent, the kind that works its way into the grain of the wood beneath your hands. Blood seeps into grooves in the block, mingling with old stains that no scrubbing can remove. When the butcher strikes bone, you hear it as well as smell it. The hollow crack, the release of marrows, faint fatty scent into the air. By the back wall, a table is devoted to fish. Some are fresh from river or sea, their bodies still slick and cool. Others, salted or smoked for preservation, give off a sharper, more lingering odor. The salt stings your nose. The smoked fish carry the dense, almost tar-like perfume of the curing racks. Where water from the fish table spills onto the floor, it mixes with sawdust and the faint scent of decay from trimmings swept into a bucket. There's sweetness here too, though it hides in pockets. In the bake corner, honey cakes cool on a wooden tray, their scent barely cutting through the more forceful aromas of meat and smoke. Dried fruits, figs, dates, raisins wait in baskets, their sugars dark and sticky. The air near them is gentler, almost fragrant, but it lasts only until someone stirs a pot of stewing cabbage and the room shifts again. And then there is the smell of what's not fresh. In a kitchen this busy waste is constant. Buckets of peelings, bones, and scraps sit ready to be carried to the midden heap, but they don't always make the journey quickly. On warm days, the smell of old cabbage water or yesterday's fish heads hovers around the edges of the room. In some corners where grease has splattered for years, the stone itself smells faintly rancid. Not enough to turn your stomach outright, but enough that you notice it when the heat rises. Every surface here tells a story through smell. The ladles smell of wood smoke, the knives of onions and fat. The flagstones underfoot hold the combined memory of centuries of spills ale broth, milk blood. The heat draws it all up into the air, blending it into a haze that clings to your skin and hair. Even your clothes will not escape. By the time you leave, you'll carry the kitchen's signature with you, a mingling of hearth smoke roasting meat and the faint sourness of boiled greens. For all its discomforts, the kitchen is a place of life. The smells here speak of survival meals, prepared bellies, filled energy, restored. Compared to the rank moat or the sharp bite of the garderobe, this is a more forgiving stench, but a stench nonetheless. And in summer, when the air is thick and the fires are still blazing, the kitchen becomes a crucible, distilling every odor of castle life into a single, inescapable perfume. You step back toward the doorway, heat on your back, and look once more at the organized chaos. Cooks shout over the roar of the fire. A boy slips past you carrying a pot larger than his head, and somewhere deep in the steam, a chicken squawks its last. The door closes behind you, and for a moment, the cooler air of the corridor feels like a relief, until you realize it carries the kitchen with it, trailing behind you like an invisible cloak. The door to the cellars is set low in the wall, half hidden behind a stack of barrels. When you open it, the first thing that greets you is the cool. After the blast furnace heat of the kitchens, the cellar's breath is almost welcome. But cool air is not necessarily clean air. It smells different down here, not the smoky warmth of the hall, nor the open-air stew of the yard. This is the smell of things kept, things stored, things waiting too long. The steps are stone worn into a slight hollow in the middle. Your footsteps echo, and with each descent, the air grows damper. By the time you reach the floor, you can taste the moisture, a faint mineral tang on your tongue. The light is thin, filtering in through narrow slits high in the wall. Shadows crowd the corners where the smell is thickest. The cellars are a world of barrels and sacks, barrels of ale. Their staves, dark with seepage, exude a yeasty, almost sweet aroma. The air around them is warmer, richer, but where one has leaked the scent, turns sour, the stale tang of beer gone to vinegar. Nearby sacks of grain are stacked high, tied tight at the neck. Fresh grain has a dry, dusty smell like sun-baked straw. But in some sacks, damp has got in, and the scent shifts, musty, mouldy, a creeping rot that ruins the whole. Cheese is kept here too. Some rounds are firm and mild, others soft and pungent. The riper ones carry a smell so strong it feels alive, sharp enough to catch in your sinuses. Wrapped in cloth, they ooze faintly, the linen stained with oils. The mice love them. Hanging from the rafters, cured meats, sway gently hams, sausages, sides of bacon. Their smell is dense, smoky, tinged with salt. But look closely, and you'll see that some are speckled with white mold, harmless perhaps. But another note in the cellar's complicated perfume. In the far corner, fish are kept in barrels of brine. The salt water smells harsh, almost medicinal, masking, but never entirely hiding the fish beneath. The brine leaks sometimes running along the floor to mingle with other spills. The stone here smells of it even when dry. There are other less appetizing scents. The damp in the air carries with it the earthy smell of the walls themselves. Stone that has drunk in centuries of moisture and now exhales it slowly. In places, the walls are furred with lichen, a green-grey fuzz that smells faintly metallic when touched. Rats leave their own spore here, the musky ammoniac scent of a creature that thrives in the dark. You hear them sometimes, a faint scrabble behind the grain sacks, a flicker of movement along the wall. Wine casks sit in their own alcove. The younger wines are bright and fruity, their smell almost lifting the gloom. But the older casks, if left untended, sour into something closer to vinegar. A single cracked bung can turn the whole corner of the cellar into a sharp, eye-watering pocket of air. People come and go from here all day, servants fetching ale for the hall, cooks collecting meat for the pot. Each time the door opens, the smell of the cellars climbs the stairs, mingling with whatever waits above. And yet, for all its heaviness, this is a vital place. In winter, the cellars are the castle's lifeline. In summer, they keep food from spoiling too fast. But nothing stored here stays untouched by the air, the damp, the subtle rot that seeps into every corner. You run your fingers along a barrel, feeling the slight stickiness where ale has leaked. The scent clings to your hand, sweet and stale. When you wipe it on your tunic, the smell only spreads. Even here, the castle breathes its own signature, a blend of preservation and decay, life held just on the edge of spoiling. As you climb back toward the light, the air shifts again. The warmth of the upper floors is almost jarring after the chill below, but you carry the cellars with you, the must, the brine, the smoke. It settles in your nose like an aftertaste, and you realize that in a place like this, the smells don't stay where they belong. They rise, they drift, they mix. The breath of the cellar will be on the rushes in the hall, in the smoke of the kitchens, in the very air of the Lord's chamber. If the kitchens are the castle's belly and the cellars its cold stomach, then the infirmary is its wound, always tender, always weeping, and never entirely clean. You smell it before you see it. It is not a single scent, but a layered fug, boiled herbs, human sweat, the sourness of sickness, and the faint copper of blood. The air is warm here, heavy and slow-moving, as if reluctant to leave. The infirmary is a long, low room lined with pallets. Some are empty, their blankets folded neatly. Others hold figures who shift and mutter or lie very still. The floor is strewn with rushes like elsewhere in the castle, but here they are stained darker, where broth or urine has spilled lighter, where someone has scattered fresh herbs in an attempt to sweeten the air. You catch lavender and rosemary in fleeting bursts, but they are quickly swallowed by stronger odours. The healer moves among the pallets with a practiced gait. Her hands smell of tallow and sage, the scent of salves she applies to wounds. In her pouch are small cloth bundles of dried plants, marigold for swelling, comfrey for broken bones, yarrow for bleeding. When she crushes them, the scent blooms briefly, almost masking the deeper smells of the room. Those deeper smells are the true story. From the far end of the room comes the sickly sweet tang of infection, a wound gone bad. It is a smell that clings to the back of your throat that makes the stomach tighten. You glance toward the source and see a man with his legs swaddled in linen, already stained through. The cloth has been changed, you're told, but the smell says otherwise. From another corner comes the wet, rattling cough of a fever patient. His breath carries its own scent, sour and faintly rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. Each time he exhales, the air near his palate thickens. There is blood here too, though not in great pools. You see it on discarded bandages, dried to a brown crisp, and in the basin where a leeching has just been performed. The leeches themselves writhe in a jar, the water cloudy and metallic smelling, and then beneath it all the smell of human waste. Some patients are too weak to rise. The rushes beneath them bear witness. Servants change them as often as they can, but there is always a trace left behind, soaked into the floor, rising in the warmth of the fire that burns constantly at one end of the room. That fire brings its own scents, the resinous bite of pine, the occasional acrid puff when damp wood is thrown on. It is kept alight not for comfort, but to keep the room warm enough for healing. Yet in doing so, it also stirs the air, lifting the smells and carrying them to every corner. In a side alcove, shelves hold jars and pots. Some contain ointments, others tinctures steeped in wine or vinegar. The vinegar is sharp and cleansing to the nose, but it is not strong enough to drive out the rest. There's honey here too, used for dressing wounds, a scent almost too gentle for its surroundings, its sweetness, a quiet defiance against the stink of rot. On a bench, a pile of soiled cloths waits to be boiled clean. The smell of them is muted compared to the rest, but it will bloom again once they're plunged into water. That task is for the apprentices who move quickly, heads down, as if hoping not to breathe too deeply. Death visits here often. You can smell its shadow even when the room is full of life. It's in the stillness of the patient who no longer shifts under his blanket. It's in the faint, strange smell of skin cooling, of breath gone. The healer notices, but says nothing until the prayers are ready. When a body leaves the infirmary, its place is taken almost immediately. The pallet is aired. The rushes replace the blanket, shaken out, but the smell remains faint and stubborn, like the echo of a bell long after it stopped ringing. You realize standing here that this room is a mirror of the castle itself, efforts at cleanliness constantly undone by the press of life and death. Herbs cannot fully mask infection. Fresh rushes cannot erase old stains. Vinegar cannot scour away grief. When you finally step outside the cooler, air is almost shocking. It feels sharp, thin, as if the infirmary's warmth had been a heavy blanket you hadn't realized you were under. But even here you carry it with you, the mingled sense of life clinging to the edge of death. And you know this. No matter where you go in the castle somewhere, someone is breathing that same air. The infirmary's door shuts behind you, and for a moment the cooler passageway feels like respite. It doesn't last. The corridor widens, the light brightens, and the castle's lungs open into the great hall. It is not empty. The great hall is almost never empty. Even between meals, there are bodies, tasks, heat and breath. A pair of servants polish the Lord's salt cellar. A messenger snores on a bench. A child chases a dog that's making off with a crust. A steward argues in a low, relentless voice with a brewer about the ale. Every one of them contributes to the air. You step in, and the hall takes you by the nose. By daylight, the first impression is wood smoke. Always the smoke lifted from the central hearth and braided into the rafters. But today it's braided with onion, with cabbage, with the faint marine tang of dried fish, revived in a pot, and with tallow yards of guttering candles, whose animal fat softens to a greasy reek as they drip. Beeswax is for chapel and ceremony. Tallow is for work. It smells of mutton cooked badly. The rushes underfoot, those faithful foul sponges, carry the rest last night's. Ale someone's morning spit, a splash of gravy, the salt sweat shaken from a hound's coat when it sprawled too near the fire. A scatter of rosemary and meadowsweet has been strewn, but their sweetness is thin as a prayer. Toward the dais, the furnishings themselves breathe. Tapestries hung to warm the walls also hold years of hearth soot and winter damp. Beat them, and you raise a ghost of old feasts and older fires. The benches smell of beer and hands. The trestle boards, scored scrubbed but never truly clean, carry a permanent patina of fat and wine, a varnish laid down by generations. Beneath the high seat sits a brace of greyhounds, elegant and ripe. They parade their own note-warm dog leather collars, flea powder, and the unmistakable musk of creatures that consider the hall theirs as much as any lord's. On a crossbar by the window, a hooded hawk dozes. Falcons have their own perfume-dried meat-oiled jesses, a sharp animal tang, somewhere between stable and riverbank. At mealtime, the halls odour flowers. Trenchers of yesterdays, bread hard enough to roof a hut, soften into sops under ladled gravy. They drink in the day's grease and the day's hands and the day's coughs. The upper board will discard theirs for the poor. The lower table will eat every last sodden corner. Either way, the rushes claim what drips. The spit sends up savour beef when it can be afforded, more often pork, sometimes goose, sometimes whatever the park or river gave up. Fat hisses into the ash. Steam rises when ale meets hot metal. A scullion shoulders through with a tub of pottage that smells of kale and smoke and last night's pot. Stews are like the whole perpetual, never wholly new. Weaning if there is wine adds a fruity lift until it's spilled. Then it congeals into a sour patch on the floor and a stain in the air. Most drink small ale. It goes flat and turns to vinegar if ignored. The hall never ignores it long. And then there is flesh. Not roasted, but living wool, cloaks, steamed from the rain caps and coifs, soaked with scalp. Sweat, hands that have laboured all morning and will labour again after the trenches are cleared. Lye soap and river water do their best, but clean in a castle means less filthy than yesterday. A few at the upper board wear pomander civet ambergris. If they're very grand rosewater, if they're merely careful, and these scents swirl like islands in a thicker sea. Musk meets cabbage, ambergris meets dog. No smell wins. They simply agree to coexist. When the Lord holds court, a different note enters iron. The smell of ink of wax warm under seal, and sometimes the thin metallic breath of blood. A broken nose in a brawl, a thief's ear nicked as warning, a beating that ended in vomit behind a screen. Justice in the hall adds its own record to the air. Sand is thrown to soak it, then swept into the rushes. Dark underworld, the stain remains. Musicians tune in the corner. Their instruments smell of gut and glue of rosin and oiled wood of the hands that have handled them for years. A drum's skin, when struck, gives off a warm, faintly animal whiff. The music hides nothing. It only carries the stink along on a livelier rhythm. Night in the hall is a different beast, but it is not cleaner. Once the lord retires to the solar, the trestles are knocked down and pallets unrolled. Scores of retainers and servants bed here among the embers. The fire is banked. The air grows thicker and damp with sleep. Wet wool, old ale, the slow release of human bodies at rest. Snores and the small comic music of digestion. A hound turns in its dream and gifts the room a fresh reminder of dog. Candles gutter and die. Tallow sets in puddles like yellowed ice to be scraped at dawn with a knife. Somewhere a child is sick. A lad staggers out to the passage rather than the garderobe and fails by 3 steps. Morning will find it, the rushes will take it, though the nose already has. And morning does come. It always comes, and it has a smell. Ash disturbed, a fresh bright strike of flint, yesterday's ale waking sour in the jugs. The hearth catches, and the first smoke of the day climbs, bringing with it the wet wool, hung to dry overnight. The hall stretches, its lungs, yawns warm breath into the rafters, and begins anew. Servants sweep. The sweeping has its own scent, rushes lifted earth, exposed a sudden blooming of what was trapped underneath. For a little while, the herbs when the air seems thinner. Then the door opens the yard, pushes in with hooves and boots, and kitchen steam and equilibrium returns. It bears saying the great hall does not smell like death, because bodies lie unburied within it, though sometimes they do. A notable corpse might be laid here before burial candles all around beeswax for once. Sweet, clean, almost heartbreaking. Even then, the hall remains itself, and the body becomes another note in the chord. More often, the death you sense is accumulation. The breath of the living turned stale, the leftovers of meals that kept them alive. The waste of all that effort held fast by stone that does not forget. What you inhale is the arithmetic of community, one room serving as dining room, courtroom, dormitory, theatre, kennel, and kitchen annex. Many functions, one set of walls. The result is not rot so much as residue. Life compresses here until it smells like its opposite. Stand at the doorway and you can read the day with your nose. Fresh herbs. A guest is expected. Extra tallow. A long night. A stronger iron note. Court sat hard. More cabbage, less meat. The stores are cautious. A shriller sourness. The ale is poor, or the brewer careless. A waft of civet. Someone wealthy is nervous. You leave the hall, and the scent follows. It always does. It clings like smoke to hair, and hem sits in the weave of your cloak, rides with you into the yard and up the stair and even out through the gate. The great hall is the castle's memory, and memory here is olfactory. You leave the tide of bodies in the great hall and climb a stair that tightens as it rises. Each turn squeezes away a little of the noise below until you reach a small landing and a heavier door. Beyond it, the solar. Sunroom they call it. And on good days that is true. It sits high and south-facing to drink what warmth winter offers. But the sun reveals as much as it comforts. In the angled light, you can see the air itself, threads of smoke from the hall below that have found their way up the stair moats of dust, shaken from tapestries, a slow roll of warmth that has gathered human breath and holds it close. The first breath in here is cloth. The room is hung to soften the stone woolen tapestries, velvet cushions, woven covers on benches, and every fibre carries its own history. Beating them in spring raises a weather of old smoke and winter damp. In summer, the dye warms and gives off a faint animal sweetness. Moth and flea powders lend sharp little notes camphor, if the household can afford it. Powdered orris root or crushed rosemary, if not. The scent is civilized but not clean. On a bench by the window lies a fur-lined mantle. Furs have their own perfume, oily warm somewhere between kennel and musk merchant. Brush them and you release a breath of the creature that once wore them. The fur is kept in a carved chest when not in use. The chest smells of beeswax, dried lavender, sewn into little sweet bags and faintly mouse. The windows are not glass or not wholly. Horn panes or oiled cloth keep the draught out and the smell in. On still days, the solar is a sealed jar of family life. The floor often boarded rather than paved as rush mats or small carpets, and beneath them, the same story you've already learned to felt of crumbs, hair-dropped pins, and last winter's dog. The servants sweep, the boards still breathe. You notice a brazier. Charcoal burns cleaner than the kitchen's logs, but it is not scentless. It adds a dry metallic thread to the room, and when the pan is dumped, that ash offers its dusty ghost for hours. On frost nights, a warming pan slides across sheets before bed. It leaves a scorched linen whiff and the sharp tang of hot brass. Here, privacy is relative. The lord reads a letter. The lady stitches. A clerk scratches away at accounts. Children clatter in with a toy. A hound noses under a stool. Each brings a smell. Sealing wax, sweet as honey and resin ink, like damp iron wool, warmed by skin, child milk, and sleep and sudden sourness. Pomanders swing from a belt civet, if you're grand enough. Ambergris, if you are very grand indeed. Orange stuck with cloves if you are merely careful. These scents do not conquer the room. They are islands in a crowded sea. A door leads inward to the bedchamber. Beds are theatres. Their curtains make a world the size of a mattress, and the curtains keep what happens there. Draw them, and the air inside is your day distilled. Two bodies sleep there, sometimes more in childbed or sickness, and the cloth learns their language, breath turned stale by morning, the salt rim of sweat dried into the weave, the comfort and faint sourness of skin after a day in wool. Sun will sweeten it, winter will not. The mattress itself, bed and bed straw are not separate ideas for most smells of field, then of people, then of time. Good houses keep to feather beds, but feathers soured by damp have a notice all their own, a high fatty note that clings to the throat. Straw compacts and goes sweetish, then mousy, then faintly moulded at the edges where a leak once visited and was never entirely confessed. Lice like heat, fleas like rushes, bedbugs like cracks in wood. Their presence has a smell if you know it, a little almond, a little dust, a little panic. Sheets are linen and precious. They are changed as labour allows, not as comfort wishes. Lye and urine cleanse them in the laundry. Between washings they keep the accounting of nights. If the household is pious, you'll catch a breath of holy water or rose water shaken on them before company. If thrifty, a handful of dried meadow sweet sprinkled and beaten away at dawn. There is a close stool in the corner, a chair with a lid lined with a removable pot. The pot is emptied by a groom, but never as quickly as the nose would prefer. Even clean the wood remembers. Vinegar helps herbs, help incense from the chapel, helps. But in still weather, the cupboard that hides the stool breathes faint reproach into the room. Men sometimes keep a Jordana-lidded urinal by the bed. It announces itself in the morning with a thin bite of ammonia and old pewter. Children's accidents are less polite. A narrow passage off the chamber goes to a private garderobe, its draught a hard winter truth. The wind through its slit can lift a bed curtain if the latch is not set, and with it comes the remembered shaft below, not loud, but present like a sermon you cannot quite ignore. Breath is biography in here. You can tell who slept ill. You can tell who had onions. You can tell when a tooth has started to rot, a sour infected sweetness that no clove or mint leaf can wholly disguise. A silver box on the coffer holds candied seeds anise, fennel toe, sweeten the mouth. It helps, it relocates the problem. Rose water rinses the face. The body goes largely unwashed through winter, wiped with a linen cloth, rubbed with a little vinegar, perfumed at the wrists. Under the fur, under the silk, we are still animals. The room keeps that truth politely, but firmly. The bedchamber is also where people are born and die. Childbed leaves a scent you do not forget. Sweat turned frantic, hot iron of blood, sharp steam from water that never boils fast enough. Dried herbs bruised in desperate handfuls. Then if all goes well, milk. Milk becomes the room for months, curdled in cloths, left too long, sour on a baby's lip, sweet on a shawl. Sickness brings vinegar and urine and a low damp heat. The prayers bring beeswax at last, sweet and golden, the only truly clean smell a castle ever manages. It arrives with death more reliably than with dinner. Even without ceremony, death has a signature air that does not move in a space that once hummed a faint, thin sweetness. As skin cools wool that suddenly smells only of itself. The bed is stripped, the straw renewed, the curtains beaten. The chamber pretends, the nose does not. Listen and you can hear the castle in the solar. The hall below exhales wood smoke and ale through the floorboards. The kitchens send up onion and heat along the stair. The moat drifts in on a southerly night, a suggestion of green rot that slides under the door like a rumor. The solar and bedchamber are meant to be apart, but stone is a conductor, not a wall. And yet for all this, people love these rooms. Here the light falls kindly. Here letters are read and answered. Here children learn to stitch and fail at silence. Here at last a door latches. The smell is part of the bargain. Privacy has a perfume of its own. You draw the curtain back, and the bed exhaled breath folds into the larger air of the solar. Someone shakes a coverlet at the window. Sunlight strikes the dust into a brief, holy snow. It is pretty. It is filthy. It is home. You close the heavy door and the corridor cooler air feels virtuous. It isn't. It only lacks witnesses. You leave the bedchamber and pass into a narrower room with fewer windows and more chests. This is the wardrobe. Not just a cupboard, but an office, a keep within the keep. Here, cloth is counted, repaired, scented, hidden from moth and thief, and when labor allows cleaned. Its air is dense with fibers, and the things used to bully fibers into obedience. The first smell is wood and wax. Great oak coffers line the walls, iron-banded and key-heavy, each rubbed with beeswax until it shines. Lift a lid, and a different weather rises, warm wool steeped in smoke. Linen that remembers last summer's sun. Fur that cannot forget the animal it was. Between folded layers lie sweet bag, little pouches of lavender, orris root, rosemary, sometimes camphor, if the household can afford it. They fight moths and promises. They never quite win. Wool rules here. It carries a lanolin tang even after weaving oily sheepsweet, a little sour when damp. Cloaks come back from rain with that unmistakable wet wool breath that fills a room in minutes and leaves a shadow for days. Hoods and sleeves show tallow gloss where candles have nodded. Rub them and you raise a faint suet reek. Fur mantles add their own musk fox, a little rank, marten softer, squirrel high and sharp. Brush them and the room exhales countryside. Linen is the wardrobe's conscience. Clean it is almost scentless, a cool grassy nothing that feels like honesty. But clean is a journey and the journey stinks. Down the stair past a door that never quite closes, you find the laundry. It is a workshop of tubs and steam of lye and Lansdale urine saved in great jars until it bites like hartshorn. Soap is dear and soft, made from wood ash lye and animal fat. It smells faintly acrid, faintly kitchen. Laundresses buck the linen in tubs. Ash lye poured hot through the pile, then left to steep until the cloth loosens its sins. The steam that rises is part hearth, part privy, part marsh. It coats the rafters, it coats your mouth. A bench stands ready for beetling, the beating that chases out the loosened dirt. The battledore thuds a rhythm you feel in your ribs. With each fall, a sour, lived-in breath blooms from the cloth. Rinse follows bucket trough, sometimes the river itself if the season is kind. River water has its own nose, green, stony, alive. It cleans and it contaminates in the same motion, carrying away lye while lending fish and mud. Some linens are blued to cheat the yellow pouches of powdered woad, or imported indigo dipped and swirled, until the eye believes in whiteness again. There's starch too boiled from wheat or bran. It smells like thin gruel while it cooks, and like dusty bakery when it dries, stiffening ruffs and cuffs that will soon taste the hall's grease. Vinegar makes a last sharp pass to sweeten and set. You can read the day by the laundry's haze, lye first, then steam, then starch, then sun, if you're blessed. Drying is politics with weather. On bright days, the linens are carried to the bleaching green, pegged and guarded from thieving gusts and inquisitive geese. Sun has a smell, nothing, and everything a clean that only time understands. Winter gives no such gift. Lines are strung in passage and loft. The castle becomes a damp lung. Linen dries slow, souring at the hems if it touches wood too soon. Mildew speaks softly at first, then speaks only of itself. The final touch is smoothing. Not every house has irons. Some use slick stones, hand-worn glass, or river pebble to press seams. A charcoal iron, when present, breathes a dry metallic tang and the sweet burnt scent of scorched starch. A slip and linen smells of accident for a week. Clothes do not only smell of themselves. Dyers and fullers lend them biographies. In a lean-to near the yard, dye vats burp their histories. Woad steeping like a dungy pond blooms into blue that clings to hands and air. Madder warms the steam with root and earth. Weld whispers straw and bitter tea. Mordants bite. Alum sour salty old iron like wet nails, fixing colour and adding their metallic aftertaste to cloth and courtyard alike. Beyond the fulling trough pounds new woolens with fullers, earth and lant until they felt and thicken. The mill hammer's time, the air smells of clay sheep, old piss industrial and intimate in one breath. Rinsed and dried the cloth returns to the wardrobe, haloed with that work, and will shed it slowly across years of rain and hearth. Vermin have votes in this chamber. Moths make dust of pride. Their larvae leave a faint sweet cereal smell in corners where a cloak lay too long. Fleas are politics brought to the skin. Their presence is not a scent so much as a chorus, but the powders used against them wormwood rue, pennyroyal pierce, the blend with their bitter green. In high summer, some households burn brimstone in closed chests to fumigate. Afterwards, the room tastes faintly of matches and guilt. Laundry day has its own liturgy. Baskets come up warm, the cloth sighing a little as it cools. A maid shakes a sheet, and the air flashes vinegar starch sun, underpinned by ghosts that will not go smoke from the hall onions from the kitchen. The lords pomander the baby's milk. Clean here is comparative. It is victory by inches. The first night in a fresh sheet is always a surprise. So blank you notice every newcomer. Your breath, your skin, your bedfellow's day. By morning the linen has learned you again. Wool rarely meets water. It is brushed, aired, smoked gently above a low brazier to chase damp and fleas. That smoke becomes part of the garment's soul. A winter cloak hung near the hearth for a week will smell of pine and mutton tallow until spring. A hood worn in the rain and dried by the fire will divide its loyalties between river and ash. In a castle, even your cloak is a compromise. The people who tend all this, the keeper of the wardrobe, the laundresses with red hands and lie-burnt wrists carry their trades on their skin. You can tell them on the stair the tart nip of lie, the sour bravery of lant, the faint honey of orris that tries to be kinder than the day. They are the castle's unsung noses and knuckles. If anything here approaches fresh, it is because they made it so and paid for it in breath. Open a coffer again at dusk. The room has warmed. The sweet bags have tired. The fur has woken. Somewhere a mouse has reconsidered its options. You lay the day's linen in cool as a thought and close the lid. Beeswax wool dried gardens. A thread of smoke. The castle's wardrobe breathes out like a tired animal and goes still. Outside the halls, dinner thickens the air with cabbage and fat. The laundry's tubs are quiet. The steam hangs in beams and drips back to earth. Tomorrow, the cycle resumes. Cloth wears the castle, and the castle wears the cloth, and the smell between them is the seam that never mends. You follow the quiet, past the rattle and slap of the laundry tubs, past the talk in the passage. The corridor narrows and cools until the air itself, seems to hush. The chapel door stands slightly ajar. You touch it with 2 fingers. It swings inward with the small pious creak of wood that has been opened 1,000 times and never oiled enough. The first breath is almost a relief. Beeswax, cold stone, a thread of resin. Here at last something like clean. The chapel is not grand few castle chapels are, but it is deliberate. Lime-washed walls hold the light. Narrow windows throw down bars of colour that lie like cloth across the floor. The air is colder than in the solar, but closer too, as if held gently in 2 hands. It smells of abstinence, less body, more breath, less grease, more candle. Beeswax rules here. Not the greasy suet of the hall's tallow dips, but clean hard tapers that burn with the faint honey. When the verger scrapes up yesterday's drips, the room sighs sweetly as the curled shavings fall into his pan. Touch a candlestick and your fingers come away with that faint polish of wax and brass like sunshine made solid. Underneath the stone speaks. Castle stone knows damp. Chapel stone keeps it. There is a persistent chill that smells of well water and lime, a mineral tongue that marks your teeth. Where the floor flags have hollowed with kneeling, you can smell the honest dust of centuries rubbed smooth by piety. Incense is not constant here, and that is its power. When the thurible swings, it is an event you can taste. The first sparks crackle in the charcoal like kindling in a dream. Then the grains go on. Frankincense bright as sunlight in resin form. Myrrh darker medicinal. Sometimes benzoin if the chest allows all vanilla and church cupboards. The smoke rises clean and white, blooming into curls that write prayers in the air. For a few minutes, the chapel belongs to it. Stone beeswax breathe everything is persuaded into a new key. Incense declares 2 things at once, that this is holy ground, and that something else here needs hiding. Priests say the smoke is the odour of sanctity. Servants say it is the best cover the castle owns. Both are right. The day's smells are stubborn. Incense sings over them, but it also kneads them into itself. Wet wool, from a rain-soaked cloak, the faint ammonia of a child's accident. In the porch, the sour ghost of last week's funeral. When the censer cools, the sweetness remains, but it carries its history like a reliquary carries bone. You sit in a side stall. The wood is old oak, polished to a soft darkness by the faith of hands and the boredom of elbows. It smells of beeswax paste and winter damp with a little tang of oiled iron from the hinges. Someone has tucked sprigs of box and rosemary into a notch. Their green is sharp and hopeful. Their perfume says, Palm Sunday came and went, and the world did not end. A book lies on the lectern. Parchment is not paper. It has a smell like a careful cupboard. Vellum breathes lightly of the animal it once was, mellowed by lime and time. The ink on its skin is iron gallstony, faintly metallic like rain in a skillet. Turn a page, and you lift a century. The leather binding adds its own deep note, warmed by hands fed with fat, now bordering on must. The choir stalls keep other perfumes. Boys smell of smoke and soap and the run from the yard. The clerk smells of ink and worry. The priest smells of linen and oil, chrysmolive oil scented with balsam, kept in tiny ampullae in the sacristy, sweet as evergreen, and used to draw crosses on foreheads and doors. Open the little silver box and the whole chapel sharpens, as if it recognizes the smell of its purpose. And yet, for all this effort, the chapel is not sealed from the castle. A draught under the door imports a whisper of the halls. Morningale and onion-warm dog, the civilized stink of many. The garderobe along the wall has an outside shaft, but its memory seeps regardless. Even holy doors cannot bar a smell that has found the grain of the wood. Somewhere above, pigeons have discovered a loose slate in the bellcote. Their guano adds its thin high note to the tower stair chalk and salt and neglect. The bell ropes themselves tarred hemp carry the harbour in them. Touch one and your hands are shipmen for an hour. Look down and you will see the reason incense never quite wins. The floor is strewn with rushes newer here than in the hall, truer to their green beginnings, sprinkled with sweet herbs that assert themselves bravely whenever a foot disturbs them. But even piety drops crumbs. The pious cough too. Babies spit up during mass. Old men leak a little when they kneel and rise. The chapel collects the castle's hopes, and it leaks with equanimity, and it keeps both. On feast days the air swells. Flowers come in from the garden or the hedgerow's lilies. If someone is extravagant, glorious for an hour, then too much roses for the Virgin, bruised and generous meadowsweet underfoot, so the whole room walks on honey. The incense is richer, the choir louder, the candles more. For a shallow breath you could believe the chapel is the opposite of the yard. Then the service ends. The door opens. The castle reclaims its air. Death belongs here more reliably than joy. The requiem has its own recipe for smell. Beeswax in quantity, resin without stint, wool black dyed with oak gallsit's new bitterness, astringent as tea. The bier's boards are fresh scrubbed, the rope bites. The mourners sweat grief into good cloth. When the coffin lid lifts, there is a hush that includes the nose. Even the best managed corpse speaks. Herbs help rosemary bay, a handful of hyssop if the herbarium is generous laid about the face and under the pall. The castle knows this odour. It is why so many candles. Beneath your feet there are graves. In a city church, the dead might turn the air sweet in high summer. In a castle, stone lids and shallow vaults keep their peace, except when something shifts or opens. Then for a week, the chapel wears a reminder that salvation is a bodily business. Slip into the sacristy, the chapel's wardrobe, and another chapter opens. Vestments hang in a little warmth linen albs that smell faintly of lye and starch. Silks that carry silks, dry, spicy hush. Embroidered copes that exhale camphor and cupboard. There is sweat here, too light and honest, trapped under the collar where devotion rubs for an hour at a time. The thurible rests on a stone shelf, cold now, but fragrant still, the chain bitten with resin in its links. A cruet stands half full. Sacramental wine is a tame sweetness, more church than vineyard. Spilled on the stone, it turns to a faint ecclesiastical vinegar and stays as a circle long after the penance is done. On the sill, a bucket and aspergillum wait for blessings. Holy water is only water until it isn't. It smells of iron and bucket and a priest's thumb. When it is flung, it brings cold air with it, and for a moment the chapel brightens, as if rain had troubled a pond. You sit a little longer. In time, your nose picks out the contradictions and makes peace with them. The chapel promises purity and offers mixture. It declares eternity and smells of work. It is the best the castle can do, and very good at that, yet it cannot exile the world outside its door. Incense does not erase, it crowns. Beeswax does not cleanse, it consoles. The stone remembers everything. When you step back into the corridor, the difference is immediate. The hall has begun to boil its noon. The kitchen sends up onion and steam. From far off the moat sighs algae into the heat. You carry the chapel with you. Nonetheless, a thread of resin in your hair, a fingertip of wax on your sleeve, a gentler breath in your chest. Holiness has a smell. So does history. In this place they are the same thing, and both of them are mortal. You leave the sweetness of beeswax and resin and take the smaller door beside the sacristy, the one not everyone uses. It sticks. The priest's key turns with the complaint of iron that has learnt patience. The air on the other side is colder, older. Stone eats sound here. Your feet know it first. Your nose knows it next. It smells of shut earth, not fresh soil, not garden after rain, but the breath of ground that has been kept from wind. Lime and damp, the faint salt of weeping walls, a dust like old books and old cupboards, and the back of a drawer you haven't opened in years. The chapel sat above like a polished hymn. The crypt below is the same hymn with the vowels taken out. Steps drop steeply. They're worn to a smooth saddle in the middle from centuries of careful tread. The lantern the verger gives you burns low, its smoke tasting of old oil. The flame gilds the edges of salt that has bloomed on the stone, a white fur of saltpeter that powder men like to scrape a mineral tang on the tongue. Water finds its way anywhere it can. In winter it beads and drips. In summer it simply breathes. The smell is colder than the temperature. People say that as a comfort. Down here it is a fact. Cold has a smell when it has nothing else to do. The first chamber keeps coffins. Some are stone chests with lids carved in the likeness of the sleeping hands, folded dogs at feet, lions keeping watch. Stone has no scent of its own, but the carved lines hold dust, and the dust has its ancestry in everything that ever happened in this place. Some lids are uncarved slabs, cold and plain. Along one wall later, burials sit in lead shells inside wooden coffins. Lead has a taste more than a smell, metallic and tired like coins handled too long. The wood, even sealed, still exhales resin and old glue, and if the joiner was lazy, a faint mouse. If a lid has shifted, the settling of earth a clumsy foot, the air near it is different. Not full, not flagrantly foul, just a thin, sweet oddness that makes the mouth water and the throat try to forget. The verger straightens the slab with more care than strength. Best not, he says, and that is theology enough. On a shelf are reliquaries, little boxes of bone and brass, and their fragrance is the chapel's, not the crypt's, beeswax, and the breath of hands that have polished faith. But look across to the corner, and you find what no reliquary can sweeten a table for the work the living must do for the dead. Winding cloths folded and kept pins in a cup. a small pot of myrrh hardened to a resinous tear, a strip of linen that still holds the ghost of rose water from the last time a lady's face was wiped. These are honest scents, frank about what they cover and what they can't. Not everybody rests long where it is first put. Ground is dear inside walls, and time is greedy. After some years, the grave is opened, and what remains is lifted, the bones cleaned reverently and carried elsewhere. The first air that rises then is memorable earth, certainly. Linen, if any, survives. Sometimes a waxy, fatty tang from flesh that never quite did what flesh is supposed to do. That last smell has no medieval name, but every medieval nose knew it. Come, says the verger, and he leads you through a low arch to the oldest part of the undercroft. Here the ceiling crouches. Rough niches gape in the walls. A bat frets past and is gone, leaving a high, chalky whiff. The floor is uneven, a map of ancient decisions. Someone chose this place, and later, someone chose to reuse it. At the far end, a small door opens to the charnel. It is not a room most visitors see, and the verger does not light it fully. One lantern is enough. Skulls gaze back tidy, as a counting house eye holes rimmed with dust. Long bones are paired stacked, nested like kindling. Smaller bones ride in baskets, a domestic detail so plain it catches at your breath. The smell here is not rot. Rot has had its day. What's left is mineral chalk lime, old linen mouse, the faintest thread of attic apples gone to paper. It is like a library that forgot its letters and kept only its pages. Rub a finger across a femur and the dust tastes of cave. You are mouth and nose and salt and sermon at once. Why keep bones? The living need space. The dead need nearness. The resurrection is a geography problem. Keeping a household's remains within the walls solves it neatly and spares the yard. So the sexton clears a grave when its turn comes, washes the bones with wine or vinegar, lays them to dry on clean cloth. Vinegar has a voice, sharp, righteous, and then stacks them here, labeled by memory, if not by name. Incense visits sometimes and lingers on brow ridges and in the cavities of eyes in a way that would be comic if it were not so ordinary. In plague years, and every castle has had a year that remembered itself. That way there was no time for courtesy. Lime was flung quick and eager, spitting heat when it met flesh. Quicklime has its own breath-hot, chalky, clean and cruel. It blinded the nose to everything else for an hour and gave the living something to tell themselves. Later, when the ground made room again, the charnel swelled. The smell, then less charter, more chorus. There are stories about skulls that sweat about water beading on stone lids before bad news. Down here, water beads on anything it can. The stories simply know their setting. What is true is simpler. The crypt remembers weather. In summer, a sweetness creeps where you hoped there wasn't one. In winter, your breath smokes and smells of iron. The candles gutter more here. Tallow sulks and leaves a greasy rim that clings to carvings and beeswax. Even at its politest will stutter and drip in the draught from a shaft you cannot see. Ropes hang for bells above. The fibers smell of tar and damp hemp. When the bells are rung, the dust shivers, and a tiny rain of ancient air falls on your face. You taste century. There is also art down here, if you can call it that. A transier cadaver monument carved in stone. A lord in his prime on the upper slab, and his bared bones beneath ribs like the slats of a thin door. Stone does not smell, but the idea does. It smells of lye and rush mats and everything you have met in this castle, set under one sentence. As I am, you shall be. A sermon shorter than incense. The verger sets the lantern by it and lets the silence stand. You can hear water somewhere counting. Drops land a long way off and talk to the back of your neck. On your way out, you pass the place where old candles are scraped for tapers anew. The pan is full of clip-ins and crumbs, the scent of beeswax, thick and consoling as cake. It does help. It always helps. But even sweetness has a limit. The crypt borrows what it can from the chapel above, braids it with lime adds, bat adds, brass adds, centuries, and returns it to you as honesty. At the stair, the air changes only slightly, but enough that your shoulders believe it before your lungs do. The chapel's resin threads back in. The sacristy offers linen and camphor. You climb. At the threshold, you look back, and the lantern paints the first step in gold. Everything beyond remains old pewter. The door shuts with its learned creak. You are back among candles and hymns and the domestic politics of breath. But your nose has been educated, and knowledge does what it always does. It makes things permanent. If anyone asks you why castles smelt like death, you could take them to the yard, to the garderobe, to the kitchens, to the moat. Or you could bring them here and let them breathe once. Stone keeps everything. The chapel lends its honey and its smoke. The crypt returns the favor with lime and bone. Between those two, the whole place lives. You carry a dusting of it with you now, salt on your lip, resin in your hair, a memory of chalk where your tongue met air. You will taste water differently for a day. You will know what damp means. And when you pass the chapel again and a thurible swings, you will love the incense more for what it cannot do.